Hello and welcome to another episode of the It Depends Lessons in Technology Leadership podcast. My name is Kevin Goldsmith and I, as always, am your host. This week, we're talking about how you follow the path from director to CTO or how you mentor it if you are a VP or CTO. There's a couple caveats I have to give. And my path, which you've heard about a lot on the podcast or if you read my book, is going to be different than everyone else's. Every CTO you meet will have a completely different path to how they got to that role. There's going to be some similarities. Most of us started as developers. A lot of us went into engineering management and then rose up through the ranks. But the way we did it and the size of companies we did it and how we did it and how long we spent at each place will vary wildly. So there is no one true path. There's no one way to do it. And in this podcast, I'm going to try and give you, as much as I can, just the things you have to think about if you're at an engineering manager level or director or VP, what the role looks like and the skills you need to develop to reach that next level. Usually, by demonstrating those skills, you make it obvious that you are ready for that role. Now, another caveat. While I have worked at IBM and Microsoft and Adobe, large companies, I've also worked in 3-person startups. I've also worked in early stage, seed stage. Most of my CTO career and VP career has been at mid-sized startups. That's my direct experience. So a lot of what I'm talking about is coming from those kinds of companies. And always with this podcast, your mileage may vary. It depends on where you are and what kind of company. I will try and talk about what this might look at a bigger company, what this might look at a smaller company. And I'm trying to find the mid-level here when I talk about each of these roles and the skills you need for them and how to develop those skills. So that's the important thing to keep in mind. I'm speaking from my own experience as a mid-sized company. In the VC world, that would be like a Series C, Series D, anywhere from like 150 to maybe several hundred employees, engineering teams of between 50 and 200. That's my own experience. That's where I came from. Although I became a director at Adobe, I was a VP at Spotify. At that point, engineering was like 800 people and grew while I was there. So I have a breadth of experience. I also mentor a lot of people at different size companies. So I've seen it and learned about it. But all of that is just to give you some perspective on just how different it is in different companies. And I'm going to try and give you the best advice I can that translates to nearly every size company. Big companies, big companies, we're totally different. And I'm not even going to tell you what it's like or how to become a CTO at a 10,000 person multi-billion-dollar company. I know some of them, and they'll tell you there's no way you can do what I did to become this role. It's a unique path there. Now let's talk about the path. What is that path? And again, I'm focusing primarily on the director to CTO path, not the full management ladder. Even if you're not at that level yet, this will tell you what the skills you need to start thinking about building. Some of the tools I'm going to talk about, some of the ways to approach learning these things, still going to be valuable for you, even if you're not quite at that level yet. So what is the role of the director of engineering? And I'm going to be very clear, director of engineering, because director of security, director of data, a lot of times you can be a director in a company without managing a larger team because you own a domain. You are the head of an important domain to the company. So you might actually only be managing a small team, but you're a director. In engineering teams, usually, a director is going to be managing multiple teams. Not always. Smaller companies, they may be the frontline manager. So the title itself is going to mean different things at different companies, but especially at mid-sized companies where you have a reasonably sized engineering team and above, as a director, you are managing managers. And as a director of engineering, you are managing engineering manager. Now, in this role, you've probably not that long ago been a developer yourself, or definitely been a frontline manager where you've been managing a team directly. This tends to be a very execution-oriented role, a very delivery-oriented role. You are working across your teams, but you're very much focused down into your organization and making sure each of your teams is delivering well, identifying issues that are coming up between the teams, and helping those supporting your engineering managers. So you really have a sort of a your team-wide area focus, kind of a narrow focus as far as the organization goes. You are generally strategic, but you are thinking in the near term of strategy. That is because while you have an understanding of the larger strategy, because it's being communicated from the executive team, communicated by your VP if you report to a VP. In mid-stage companies, you might be reporting directly to a CTO, or smaller companies, you probably will. But you don't have the complete picture of where the company's going, and you're focused down into your organization. So you're usually only thinking out maybe 6 months or a year when you're thinking strategically. You're also somewhat narrowly technical, and that's not a bad thing. What that means is if you come from being a developer, which most directors of engineering have come from being, you were a specialist. You were focused on one part of a building product. And now maybe you became an engineering manager of your team, and maybe it was a cross-functional team. So you had a little bit more exposure to areas of technology that weren't your specialty, but they're very adjacent to it. These are people you would have been working with, so you have an understanding of it. When you move from being line manager to being a manager of managers, you usually are going to be responsible for a set of teams that are all working together, which means that you'll be responsible for a relatively small number of different disciplines within engineering. So you're narrowly technical in that you're managing a bit of a narrower range of engineering disciplines. Now, once you move into the VPE, Vice President of Engineering slot, especially again at a larger company where you literally have a VPE, not all small companies do. And generally, in a bigger company, that VPE is going to be managing directors who are managing engineering managers. That was my role as a VPE. I was managing directors who were managing engineering managers. At a smaller company, the VPE might be the head of engineering reporting directly to the CEO, especially if you have a CTO who is a co-founder, who was never a manager of large teams, and that's not really their area of expertise. So in those kind of companies, the VPE might be the one that's really running engineering day to day and is a peer to the CTO. In lots of other companies, though, no, the VPEs, sometimes multiple VPEs, are reporting to a CTO and managing directors or managing engineering managers. At the VP level in companies, not just in engineering, your focus is company-wide. So as a director, you focus down into your team. As a VPE, you're lifting your head up and you're looking around. You're working with cross-functional peers, other VPEs. You're usually considered part of the extended senior leadership team. So if senior leadership is the C level, the VP level usually is looked at as an extension to that senior leadership team. Instead of thinking executionally, you're usually thinking operationally. And what that means is you're not just looking at, is this team delivering? Is that team delivering? What's going on between these two teams? You're usually thinking across, again, a larger organization. So you're looking at the system a little bit more. You're thinking at a broader system level because you have directors that report to you that are focused on the execution level. So that lets you also think a little bit, look around a little bit, think more, have a broader focus, have a longer term view, because your directors are thinking in the shorter term. Your C level is thinking much longer term. Usually, if a director is thinking out 6 months or a year, you're usually thinking out 1 to 3 years. Where do I want to bring my organization to? And how do I align that to the company and the company's long-term strategy? Because as a member of the extended senior leadership team, you have visibility into the company's long-term strategy. You are still technical. You have VPE managing directors who are managing engineering managers, who's managing developers. Not always, but usually these people are still technical. They come from a technical background. But you are definitely at this level, you're starting to be much more broadly technical. And part of that is because you're further away from having been doing the work yourself often, but also you're responsible for a much wider set of disciplines. As an engineering manager, you might be responsible for back end, front end, maybe test, or you might just be responsible for back end engineers. At the director level, maybe you're responsible for back end, front end, test, maybe data engineering or something like that. That's very specifically part of your remit. At the VP level, now you're managing multiple directors, which means you're going to be responsible for a much wider set of disciplines. And if you are a VPE reporting to the CEO, you're responsible for all the engineering discipline. So you still are technical, but you have to understand a much wider range of technologies. You become more broadly technical and less narrowly technical. At the CTO level, if the director is really focused on execution, looking down into their organization, the VPE is focused on operations and the system and working cross-functionally and really thinking at a company level. At the C level, you're expected to not only be functioning as the senior leadership of the company, you're also expected to be paying attention to what's going on in the industry, both in the technology industry. What are the trends? What are the things that you need to be aware of as a company? What are your competitors taking advantage of in technology? But also what's going on in your industry. If you're in fintech, what's going on in the fintech industry? Like, how is that changing? Because you are part of the company strategy group. And you've got to think past just how do we deliver our software into how is the company executing and how can the company execute better? And how can my team, the technology team, support the company strategy? So you have not just a focus of the company, but you're really looking more broadly. You're looking out. So you have the widest focus. You're very strategically oriented because at the C level, you are often thinking out 3 to 5 years. So you've got a much longer term strategy. Instead of being operationally, you're really thinking strategically, and you're very broadly technical. When I moved into the C level, now I was responsible for security. Now I was responsible for infrastructure. Now I was responsible for IT, including things like help desk and stuff like that. I was responsible for data analytics and data science and data engineering and supporting finance team, supporting marketing team and things like that. I had no experience in those groups, and I had to learn enough to be a good leader of those teams, to support those teams, to make sure those teams were getting what they needed, and to make sure that we, as an organization, were supporting the whole company, not just shipping product. So the path from director to CTO is really these multiple channels where your focus gets wider and wider, from your team to the company to the industry. You move from being execution and delivery oriented to operationally oriented to strategically oriented. And you go from being narrowly technical to more broadly and then much more broadly technical. How do you do that? How do you follow that path? Let's talk about it in terms of focus first. How do you broaden your focus? And it is by demonstrating that you have a broader focus, that you show that you are now ready for that role. So talk to your cross-functional peers. If you're an engineering manager today, how much do you know about how product works, how UX works, how test works? Start by understanding the teams that you work with, the disciplines that you work with every day. Then reach out to other parts. Take a finance person to lunch and ask them what they do. What is accounts payable? Why is this important? Why does this function exist in the company? And what does it do? it's important to start thinking beyond your team. Learn more about the business of your company. A lot of times in engineering, we can be really focused. A lot of developers are just, yep, give me the next ticket. I'm going to do the next ticket. And you might be in health, you might be in finance, you might be in SaaS, you might be in lots of things. How well do you understand the business that you're in? It's very easy if you're really close to the work. You don't need to pay attention to what's going on in your industry. You can just do your work and you can do a pretty good job that way. But if you want to move into more senior levels, you need to start understanding the industry. You need to be able to have conversations about how your company fits into the industry. Because as you become more senior, that is part of the discussions you get involved in. So start learning about the business of your company. You can follow industry blogs, podcasts, trade press. That exists for every industry in the world. You should be paying attention to it if you're hoping at some point to be moving up into more senior levels of leadership, because you're going to have conversations about what your customers need, and you need to understand why that's important. If you get an opportunity to participate in broader organizational discussions, let's say HR is asking for input on the dental plan, do that. Look for opportunities for these kind of more broad kind of conversations, because that gives you an opportunity to meet people from different functions. That gives you an opportunity to pay attention to what's going on outside your own team. That gives you an opportunity to meet other folks that you can take to coffee and find out about their jobs. That's an easy way, when those are available, to take advantage of them. It also shows that you're thinking past your own team, which is a good signal to your manager. If you think there is a way you can improve not just how your team works, but how engineering works, or how front end works, or back end, have a conversation with your boss, propose a change, and offer to help guide that change within the organization. If it's a good idea, your manager is definitely going to appreciate it. And it's an opportunity for you to take a broader leadership role and be curious, be interested, care about stuff that's not just the strict responsibilities of your job day to day. Because again, in order to take on a broader focus, to take on a wider understanding, to become more strategic, you have to care about the stuff that's beyond the specifics of your role. You need to start thinking about these things. So be curious, ask questions, learn. We talked about broadening focus. Let's talk now about widening your orientation. Understand your organization's greater goals. If you're really execution focused as a director or as an engineering manager, your boss is thinking more operationally, is thinking past the specifics into the system that your team is in. Part of that is understanding the goals of your organization. You will hear about them in town halls, hopefully, or white papers within the company. Do you understand them? Do you understand why they exist? Do you understand the strategy behind them? Work to make sure that your teams are informed on it and aligned to the company's goals, not just your team's goals. If there's organizational improvement efforts, or if you have ideas for organizational improvement efforts, and I mean, again, you're trying to widen your orientation, you're trying to think past your teams into the bigger organization, look for opportunities to work or help outside your team where you can get more exposure to what's going on, either in the company or in the technology team or things like that. Make it known to your boss. Hey, I'm interested. If things like this come up, I'd be really interested in helping. Or if you have ideas, again, demonstrating you have ideas here, demonstrating you're thinking about this looks great. Shows that you are thinking more broadly. And maybe your first ideas aren't the best ideas because you're learning. That's okay. Having them is good. Having them shows that you're thinking. And even if it's not the best idea, you have a good conversation with you and your manager about why, and why this may not be the right idea now, or maybe why this is not the right idea for the business, but that teaches you. So then you have better ideas the next time. Now let's talk about thinking longer term strategically. As an engineering manager at Adobe, I like to think I had some good strategy, and that made it clear to my managers that maybe I was ready for that director level role. I was lucky. Adobe had created a training program for people who were on the cusp of the director level. And so they created a program to help teach folks like me. That program was 100% focused on strategy. It was all about strategy, because that was the understanding of what's the difference between a line manager and a manager of managers. If you're looking to get into that level, or you are in that level, and you're trying to figure out what you need to do to be ready for the VP role, it's all about demonstrating that you have good strategic thinking. So how do you do that? Beyond just reading good books and thinking big thoughts, how well do you understand the strategy of your organization, be it tech or division or the company? How does your team's work support that strategy? And how could it better support the strategy if it doesn't neatly align to it? One of the teams I led at Adobe was a team that was really focused on heterogeneous computing for signal processing, stuff that ran in Photoshop and Premiere and After Effects and eventually Flash. That was designed to, if you had a GPU, if you had a good multi-core CPU, to schedule the processing where it would happen the fastest with the right level of quality. Now, this was before there was CUDA. This was before there was OpenCL. This was hard stuff. And this was a team of really bright folks who were experts at GPU programming and multi-core programming and compilers and all sorts of stuff, because we were doing very, very low level, very, very close to the hardware work. The company during this time, this is when Adobe started thinking about the cloud. And so my team was really, really focused on maximizing every cycle of your desktop computer or laptop. And all of a sudden, the company's now thinking about the cloud. Completely different problem. But I realized, okay, well, especially back then, it wasn't necessarily practical to put a bunch of GPUs in the cloud. But part of the system that we built was this scheduling thing, because when you're scheduling to the GPU, the bandwidth to the GPU is very slow. The processing on the GPU is very fast versus like a CPU. So you got to schedule, where's the best place to run this compute? And what I realized was, well, we were very focused on these very, very short latencies, and moving work to the cloud was very, very long latencies. But again, we had the benefit of putting whatever hardware we wanted to in the cloud, which meant that if you were running on okay hardware, maybe you had a software GPU, maybe this would actually work where we could schedule work to the cloud. So we started thinking about the cloud as just another compute target, which was aligning us to the company's strategy. Because I, as the leader of this team, could have been very much, that cloud stuff is dumb. Look at all this great hardware we can take advantage of. Why do you need to use the cloud at all? And that would have been fine for a little while, but as the company moved more and more to the cloud, we would have just been completely out of step with the company strategy. So instead, I started talking about, and I started building strategy around, how do we align and how do we support the cloud strategy? And people noticed. People noticed that we were thinking about that more so than to some of our peer teams, which is one of the reasons why people started thinking of me as director level. I was thinking about the strategy beyond my team and aligning to it. I mentioned that at the VP level, you're thinking more operationally. You're thinking about the system more than you are at a director level, which is very execution focused. How do you understand the system? Even if you're an engineering manager, or definitely if you're a director, start mapping the broader system within your organization. How well do you understand the interaction between teams? How well do you understand the interaction between individual leaders? You want to understand the dependencies and relationships between teams and the constraints each team has. What looks like very operational thinking is understanding that your teams have a dependency on this team that's outside your group, and then figuring out that team that's outside your group, this other team also has dependencies on it. And so realizing if we start sending that team requests at the same time this other team is sending requests, our request may get delayed if that other team's working on something higher priority. So maybe we preload some of our requests and then we figure out how we schedule around those other teams' requests so that we can maximize our throughput. That is operational thinking. That is also strategic thinking. That is VP level thinking. Track industry trends and talk to people about how they may impact your company or your product with your manager. Show your manager that you are thinking about what's going on in the industry. And don't just say, hey, I read this blog post. What do you think about that? Bring opinions. I wonder if this could be a problem for us because this other company is taking advantage of this technology and we aren't, and that may allow them to do this thing that we haven't been able to do. Now, right now, AI is obviously dominating every conversation I have with everyone. How do you understand it? How can your company better take advantage of it? What are the constraints? What are the problems? Do you have ideas around how to address those? Thinking more broadly, where do you see this going? How could this impact your company 6 months from now, a year from now? You don't have to solve it, but if you have strong opinions that you can discuss intelligently with your manager, you are demonstrating extended strategic thinking. Now, your technical breadth will naturally expand as you just are responsible for more stuff, whether you like it or not. And in prior episodes of the podcast, I talked about why you should let your technical breadth expand, why you should be trying to learn about the technologies that you're responsible for so that you can support them and so that you can represent them. Let's say today you are responsible for disciplines that you never worked in, which you would be probably as a director or even as an engineering manager. Learn more about them. Talk to the people that do them. You don't have to become an expert in them, as I said in that prior episode, but you should understand them enough that you can have a conversation with somebody who does do that all day and they feel like you've heard them and understood them. Talk to your peers. So if you have peers that are responsible for disciplines that you aren't responsible for, try and learn more about it. Talk to them. What is it like managing data analytics? How does that work? If you can, shadow teams in areas that you aren't as familiar with. Just see if it's okay with them to sit in on their planning meeting or on their team meeting. Just listen and just say, hey, I'm just really interested and I want to learn more. Is it okay if I just sit and listen? They may say yes, they may say no, but if they say yes, just sit and learn. And then if you have questions after the meeting, go and find somebody and buy them a cookie or something and ask your questions. Creating your own side projects to learn new technologies is great. I do that. I've done that for years and years and years. That's how I've learned lots of technologies. Again, I'm not an expert in them, but I know them enough because I've built projects with them that I can have a substantive conversation with a developer that works for me that's an expert in them. I can ask questions that aren't too dumb because I've played around with it enough. And I'm not going to pretend I know more than they do, but I can at least understand what they're saying to me. If you are a fellow CTO today or a VPE, how do you mentor the next generation? For all of us, if you're at a company that's been around for a while, there's probably somebody who is doing your job before you. There'll definitely be somebody doing your job after you because none of us is going to be in our job for infinite years. So thinking about how you mentor and grow the people in an ideal world, you've set up people that can just step into your job that you've mentored. How do you mentor? Number one, identify potential. If you're a C level or a VP level, you got a lot of future leaders working for you. learn to look for these signs. I talked about people who are curious, people who are thinking further out, people who are thinking strategically, people who are experimenting and trying to learn, who are talking to other functions, who are trying to understand how the company works, how the industry works. Those people are already thinking about the things they need to think about to be at a director, VP, or CTO level. Support them. Identify those folks. Find those folks in your org. Delegate to them. Delegate to your leaders that report to you. One of the best things that helped me prepare to be a CTO happened at Spotify. I was a VP reporting to the CTO, and it was time for Spotify to create a career path for engineering. We hadn't had one before then. And I have 3 episodes about it. So you can go back and hear about the actual process if you're interested. For my own growth, the CTO delegated that to me and supported me on it. And I learned so much because I had to work across the entire technology organization. I had to build a career pathing for everyone, not just for my team. I had to talk to tons of people across the organization, make sure we were anticipating their needs, make sure that it was going to work for them, get feedback from them, like this, don't like this. I had to work with HR a lot, and not just my HR business partner, but the CHRO and the compensation team and the HRIS team and all those kinds of things, which made me have to work really cross-functionally. It was a great experience, and I learned a tremendous amount from it. So that delegation, and maybe he delegated to me just because he didn't feel like doing it. That's great. Maybe he delegated to me because he wanted to give me an opportunity. That would be even better. But it really helped me when I became a CTO. Since then, at companies I've been in leadership on, we've created multiple different career pathings. And I can tell you, I've delegated it every time. It's not just that thing. There's lots of things you can delegate that will give people that kind of experience. Explain what you're doing. In your staff meetings, you can say, hey, we'd made this decision. And that's fine. People will, okay, sure. Why? Give the why. Explain the why. Explain your thinking. Not just because that helps people understand it and support it, but because that also helps people when they come to a similar problem, they at least know why you approached it in a certain way, and they can choose to do it in the same way you did it or choose not to, but they're not just treating it like a pattern matching. Well, Kevin did this, so I'll do this. No, Kevin did this for these reasons. Are those reasons still valid? Do I agree that that's the thing to do or not? But it gives them some thinking. It's really hard to understand, especially as you move into more and more senior management, because you just have less and less contact with your boss. So it's really hard to see what's going on behind decisions, because there might be months of thinking that lead to a decision. But when the decision is announced, you get the 5-minute explanation when it was 30 hours of meetings that led to that. So you miss all the steps that get you to that point. To the extent you can explain this, certainly to your directs or to the larger team or to those folks that you've identified have potential, you should do that. Overshare, which means be transparent. Be transparent about as much as you can be. Now, it's very tempting, especially as you move into senior leadership, because you have access to a lot of stuff you can't share. So that you tend to go from being fully transparent to being more and more closed, because you also get into a place where you're not sure what you can share. And so it becomes easier to not share by default. I'm always trying to make sure I know what I can share and what I can't share, and then sharing as much as I can. Because again, that gives the people that work for me that context, one, to make better decisions. And I've talked about that a lot on this podcast. But two, it helps them understand why I'm acting or deciding the way I am, and why I may do something tomorrow because of what I've overshared today. Whereas if I haven't given you that information, it may seem random, or you may not understand why I've said this or made this decision. So I'm very careful because I have to be careful what I share, but I always make sure the things I can share, I do share. Give opportunity. Giving opportunity means creating chances for folks to think in broader operational context. I talked about volunteering for things that get you a broader focus or a broader orientation, organizational improvement efforts, those kinds of things. Those only happen if those projects exist. Create those projects. Give people that opportunity. Don't assume the HR team or some other team is going to create those opportunities. You can create them for your organization yourself. That's different than delegation. Delegation is taking something you do and handing it to somebody else so they can learn how to do it. Giving opportunity is just programs, creating processes, creating events so that people in your organization have a way to expand their thinking or broaden their focus. Now, it's important to give feedback. If you're a manager, you're always supposed to be giving feedback, but giving feedback not only on how you did at your level, but what you might do different at the next. So if you have a director reporting to you, they do a good job on a project for a director, you can say, hey, you did great on that. That was really well done. And then you can follow that up with, if you were thinking about being a VP might do this. So you did great. If you want to think about how to expand your orientation, broaden your focus, the next time something like this comes up, this might be what I would do the next time. And give that feedback with an eye towards growth, not just an eye towards telling people when they're doing well or telling people when they could have done better, but actually giving them feedback that helps them think about how they grow. And of course, give support. Support the people that work for you, want to develop them. One of the things that makes me happiest when I look back on my career isn't just the cool projects I worked on, the cool companies I worked at, the cool things we invented, the products that people use or used. All that stuff will fade. The stuff that I worked on at Adobe, that cool heterogeneous computing project, long gone. Totally unnecessary. Technology moved on. You don't need it anymore. That's great. I'm really proud of that work and that team. And we did great things. If I look back at what I'm proudest of, it's when I see somebody that worked for me, especially somebody that reported directly to me, and I see their LinkedIn announcement. I am delighted to share that I am starting my new role as a CTO, or I am delighted to share that I'm starting my new role as a VPE. That is more meaningful to me, to think that at least in some way, I could have supported that and I could have helped that person. That to me is much more important and makes me much prouder than all the cool projects and all the cool stuff I've shipped. I'm very proud of that stuff too, but the impact I've had on the world as a person is more directly tied to the people that I've supported and how they've grown and how they will then support the next generation behind them. And that's what makes me the most proud. So for you on your path, working your way up to this path, I wish you the best of luck. It's a tough job, but it's a great job. Thanks, everybody. As always, if you want to reach out, ask questions, follow up, please do. Easiest to find me, I'm at kevingoldsmith.com on Blue Sky, but you can email contact@itdependsbook.net. If you want to email me, I'm also on Instagram, on Threads, on X, but I don't read it very often, to be honest. LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on all those places. I'm usually my name, Kevin Goldsmith, on all those platforms. It's relatively easy to find me. I love getting your questions. I love helping you out if you have challenges. So please reach out. And I will see you next week in the newsletter. I will see you back here in 2 weeks on the podcast. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.